For DNF podcast. This is episode 11. And by now, if you've been following along, let me give you the elevator version of what you might find a longer version of in the earlier episodes. And that is, I'm on my way back to the 100-mile distance. I have DNF'd 7 out of 8 attempts, and I'm not even bothered by it. I just love it so much. I'm going again, but I really want to get the finish. I've wanted to get the finish every time, but I haven't. And this time I'm going about it differently. A wise man has many counselors. And this time I'm talking to as many people as possible who've had some wins. Most everybody, even the elites that I've talked to, refreshingly, have had some DNFs under their belt. But there's also been times where they've pushed through some really gnarly urges to quit. And I have not been able to do that most of the time. I've done it at like Speed Goat 50K, which they joke is the shortest 100-miler in the country. Made it through that one, but I'm ready to do it at the 100-mile distance. And so I'm gearing up for Zion. And so today I've asked my friend Troy Meadows to join me. We met because Troy is the host of the Midpacker Pod, and he was kind enough to have me on. And so as I've gotten to know him, I thought, looking into him as a runner, running with him on his podcast, I thought, okay, let's flip the script a little bit here. And I want to ask Troy questions about his running career and, as he juggles life, home life, dad life, partner life, and, extreme ambition on the trail. So Troy, first off, thank you. Thanks for making time.
Yeah, no problem, man. Great to be here.
Yeah. Okay. Before we dig into running, and you clearly have a long resume of running and efforts and races and wins. And by that, I mean finishes. In my world, a win is a finish.
Yes, sir.
Tell me about you. I know you're in North Carolina now. Is that where you went to high school? Is that where you grew up?
No. So yeah. And this is funny because my quintessential question is like, who is the guest, and so it's like kind of getting turned on me. My background is I actually I didn't grow up in the United States of America. My parents were Department of Defense school teachers. So I grew up overseas for the first 17 years of my life.
Where?
When I was first born, I was born in the United States, spent 2 years in Bonn, Germany. I have a twin brother. We were born 2 months premature. I spent the first month of my life in an incubator. It was anyway, that's a whole nother story. But then, my first diaper was a surgical mask. I was so tiny they didn't even have a diaper size for us. So
where was that? What city? What's on your birth certificate?
That was Florence, South Carolina. My mom was on her way to fly to Germany because that's where she was going to be stationed in Bonn, Germany before. Then this was when it was the capital before the wall came down in 1980. And she went into labor on 95 and just happened to be they pulled into the hospital at Florence, and Florence happens to have at the time the premier prenatal care center in the Southeast. Basically, it was based in Florence, South Carolina. So so I made it. I'm here, and I spent 2 years in Bonn, Germany. We spent 2 years in Bonn, Germany as a family, and then we spent a couple years at Clark Air Force Base in the Philippines. When I was 5, we moved to Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. Spent almost a decade living on this tiny little base on this little island in the Caribbean. A
decade? You were in Guantanamo Bay for a decade?
Yeah. So it's the coolest small town you've ever been to because it has everything you need. It's 48 square miles. Half of that's bay, surrounded by the largest active minefield in the world. You can come in by boat and you can go out by plane, and that's basically that's it. And they have these ferries that go across to. The airport was on one side of the base, and then the bay's bays between the other. Most of the people live on the leeward side. Then you would take a ferry over to the westward side. Anyway, to get to the airport. But we had everything you would need. We had a McDonald's. We had there's a school on the base where my parents taught, and there's it's a lot of active duty military and their families, and it's a community. It's the kind of community where you don't lock your doors at night. You feel very, very safe. Everyone knows everybody. The base wide speed limit's 35 miles an hour. I mean, it was honestly an amazing place to grow up. And my dad at the time, my dad was really into cycling and biking. He did a couple triathlons, some swimming, but it really wasn't his thing. He's been an athlete his entire life. And I remember being like 9 and I would ride my bike. He would go for a run after work and I would ride my bike with him, you know, and that was kind of some of my first like
that's cool
adventures into endurance sports. And then me and a buddy, you know, we like created a mountain bike route out on base. And like I was in America over the summertime because my parents were teachers, they'd have off. And then they actually had the race and my buddy got to ride the event. And like, so it was like endurance has been a big part of my life, but yeah. So 9 years in Guantanamo. And then, we got evacuated during, the Cuban Haitian, there was like a immigrant crisis, right? Where a bunch of people were leaving these countries and they were looking for asylum in the United States and the US government didn't have a place to put them. And we're talking like 30, 40,000 people, like making boats and taking to the water and just trying to like a mass exodus from these two countries. And so they turned the base into a place to do due process for these individuals and figure out like what they were going to do with them. And so they evacuated all non-essential personnel off the base. We had like 2 days to pack a bag and someone was put in charge of packing out like our neighborhood. And we ended up back in Germany and I spent 4 or 5 years
from
in
Guantanamo
Ramstein.
Bay back to Germany. Wow.
Yeah, back to Germany. And then we ended up in Ramstein Air Force Base. And that's where I did like...
I was going to ask about Ramstein. I didn't want to be too cliche, but of course...
Yeah, I mean, it's the place.
The great band, Du hast mich, or whatever.
Yeah, and that's also where the band's from. It's crazy. And, you know, Ramstein is... I mean, in that area, it's the largest... It's like 60 square miles, it's the largest... American English speaking population outside of the continental United States because there's like 8 or 9 military bases within 60 square miles. And there's a lot of active duty and civilian civilian contractors that work for the military living in that area. So that was that was like 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th grade. You know, it's like basically middle school through high school. I spent living in Germany and kind of.
Did you pick up any German though? Do you speak any German, or was it all English for you?
So it's hard. Yeah, like I tried, and all of my German friends would be like, "Oh, you're English," and like speaking like this with a little bit of a German accent, you know, like, "Oh, you're English," and we're like, "Yes, yeah." I mean, "Oh, let's speak English," and then they're like,
"Yeah," they wanted to practice their English. Yeah,
yeah, because in Europe, like you learn 3 languages. You start learning 3 languages from the time you're like 6, 7. Like you teach, and then you get to pick one when you're in high school, and like so everyone that was in my generation and a little bit older, like everyone spoke really good English. Plus, you know, ever since World War II, these bases have been there. So there's a whole population of Germans who grew up basically with, you know, Americans in their country and in these areas. And so they all pick up a lot of English. And what it turned into is like, they wanted to learn how to speak cool. That's what they would say. Like, "Oh, teach me how to speak cool." So we'd be teaching them, we would be, my friends and I, we're all teaching them like slang and like how to sound. Cause they learn the Queen's English, as they would call it, right? They learn like English. They don't speak American, you know? So, anyway, it was just kind of, and that was for me culturally, like I look back at my upbringing and I'm just like, oh, it allowed me to have a lot of empathy for people. My ability to communicate like, I think with individuals and with groups really comes from just being around multiple cultures, growing up and having that kind of experience. So,
yeah, we're in the process of I've spent several months. We've spent several months as a family in Europe, and I've done several things in Paris related to entrepreneurship and a program there. But ultimately, we're trying to get back there next year to spend a full year. And we've got a 10-year-old, a 7-year-old, and a 4-year-old. And it's for what you just said. That's the exact reason we want to. In the moment, it feels like, oh, this is a lot to schlep some kids around and get over there. But in the end, someday when they're, you know, in their 40s, I want them to look back the way that you just did fondly and say, oh, because of that, I am a better person because I can talk to more people who are different than me, people who are older, people who are younger. I understand, you know, I'm more generous with people about their background. And if I don't understand something, I'm more curious rather than judgmental. Like all of those things are what we're wanting to give to ourselves and to our kids. So I love hearing you say that.
Well, let me I'll connect you with 2 of my friends. They actually have spent the last 2 years living in the mountains of France, and they have 2 almost teenage boys, like 10 and 11 or 11 and 12. And they've done exactly what you're trying to do. And I'm happy to connect you with,
connect me.
Yeah, I'm happy to connect you with my friends, Matt and Marine. And, they've got stories, and they've got like, there's just so many hurdles you don't even think about that you have to like deal with. And they've done it all. So I'm happy to connect you too. So
I can't wait. So tell me then, now we're kind of college age for you. Did you go off to college? What did you do after that last stint in Germany?
Yeah, so my parents, since I could say it, since I was like 2 years old, they'd be like, "What happens in 16 years?" And I'd be like, "Out I go," like, and it wasn't like, it was a joke. It was like tongue in cheek, but it was kind of like, when you turn 18, you graduate from high school, you're gonna go off into the world, and you're gonna like do you know what I mean? So, I went to a semester of college in the United States. College didn't really work well for me, and I ended up back in Germany for a couple months, like working odd jobs on base while we tried to figure out what the next steps were going to be. And I ended up settling on this trade school called Full Sail in Orlando. And I went to school for film and video production. I had in high school, cool. I was like in TV. I took TV class. They didn't even have I was like inundated with that teacher and like with that part of like the school curriculum that like they were creating. By my senior year, they didn't have a TV4 class, but they made one for me. You know what I mean? And then I was like the teacher's aide for that, for first year students for that teacher. And so I was very much like into like that part, that type and part of like storytelling, and like kind of content creation, I guess. And this is back in like the late 90s. So it was like all VHS and like deck to deck editing and like all that's fun. Yeah. It's like fun stuff, and making music videos and like skate videos. I was really into rollerblading at the time. And so then I ended up going to Full Sail, got a degree in film and video production. I mean, it's a hard school. It's 13 months. Yes. I took a little longer than that. It's a very intensive school. Just to give an example, it's a 24-hour run school. So you could have lectures from 9 o'clock, and it's 4-hour blocks. So you could have lectures from like 9 to 1, and then have to be back at school for a 1 to 4 lab, or a 1 to 5 lab at night, and then be back to class 4 hours later. And the whole idea is like they're kind of prepping
it's just
you.
Absurd.
Yeah, and they're kind of trying to prep you for that like
for
lifestyle.
That creative life.
Yeah, because like when you're on set, let's say I'm in a movie and you're on set, like I mean, call could be like that. And if they don't get the shot, the day could go long, and you have to be there the next morning. And same with audio engineering, and same with show production. So they're trying to get you used to the roadie life, basically.
I mean, it ties nicely into the overnight 100-mile effort.
Sure. Yeah, it definitely does.
So where you're in college, you wrap up at Full Sail. What's your path to ultras from there?
Yeah, so I ran in high school. I did track and cross country, like ran the mile, ran cross country, like freshman, sophomore year. I got into like, I graduated high school. I got out of running. I got into the jam band scene, and I basically would spend 6 months out of the year working odd jobs in Florida, where I was, where I had roots from living in Orlando at Full Sail. And then I would spend 6 months out of the year traveling around the country, seeing shows, being like the most vagabond of vagabond, like I almost got arrested in Chicago for dumpster diving. I've definitely eaten at soup kitchens. I've spent weeks living in the national forest, because that's where you could stay there for 14 days at a time.
Yep.
I've crisscrossed the country before I was 30, I had crisscrossed the country probably like 17 times from East Coast to West Coast.
Were you following Fish around, or like Grateful Dead? Were you that type, or did you have like 2 dozen bands that you'd go see?
So I would do like a lot of the festival scene. So you would kind of like, and this is back in the day, like, you go to the library to get on Jambase, and you'd print out like we had a folder. It had like every festival on Jambase for like 3 months. We'd kind of pick and choose what were on the route. Definitely was on Fish Tour for a little bit. I've seen like 30 Fish shows. Nice. I got into this band called Sound Tribe Sector 9 for a while, back before they were like really big. Toured with them. I've probably seen like 50 or 60 of their shows. Whoa. I got into just like enjoying. I did I went to a couple rainbow gatherings. I got into just like living, kind of like living on the fringe for the most part. Like I tell people, like in my 20s, I was like self-induced homeless, you know, like it was by choice, you know. And then I found the gym show outside of Tucson, Arizona, and I actually first year we went to Quartzsite, which is like goes on year round, but the month before the gym show in February, was living out in the wash, living in the desert, and then went to Tucson, and then I got into making jewelry. So I would do like, so like not silversmithing, but like wire wrapping, and like we call it cold fusion. Did that for a long time. But ultimately, like, I mean, I spent a better part of my 20s just being about as vagabond world, trying to like continue that world traveling that I was doing when I was younger, and not really caring about what the future looks like, you know, living that I guess I was living the YOLO lifestyle before it was like cool to live the YOLO lifestyle, right? Yeah. So
you're on these tours. Are you running? I mean, like, what's the introduction? What's the introduction into ultras? Was it?
Thanks for bringing it back full circle. Yeah. So I ended up in Asheville, North Carolina, which I'm actually kind of full circle back there. And I got into. I was always into, like, I was a Boy Scout growing up. I was always into, you know, obviously like outdoors, living outdoors. I got into ultralight hiking and backpacking when we lived in Asheville, and so I would look at the map and, like, I mean, if you've ever been, like, the Blue Ridge Parkway is right there. There's 4 wilderness areas, like 4 different wilderness areas basically surrounding Asheville. And I would just like plan routes out on map and compass. And I would tell my girlfriend at the time, but my wife now, and I would just look, I'd be like, I'm going in here. I'm going to be in this area. I'm coming out. You'll see me. I'll see you in 4 or 5 days. And she's like, oh, cool. This is what's happening. Huh? I'm like, yeah, this is what's happening. Yeah. And so, you know, I did that for a long time and I really enjoyed it. Her and I decided to make a move out to California, spent 15 years in California, and ultimately like life, like what happened was life got in the way of spending exorbitant amounts of time in the backcountry for me. And so I ended up like, I was like training I kind of heard about obstacle racing and I was like, oh, this sounds like fun. I want to do this. I kind of was trying to get Spartan back into fitness. Yeah. Spartan stuff. Yeah. And I used to smoke cigarettes. Like I was definitely not like, I was always healthy, but I wasn't the healthiest person. Like I'd look healthy and I was fit ish, you know, always had a decent motor, a decent engine, even when I was smoking cigarettes. And I had some like traumatic stuff happen. My mom died, my dog died, and I turned 30, like all in the same 2-week period. And so I started running like a week later, you know, and I found I kind of started trying to get back into fitness and finding fitness. Was doing a lot of calisthenic work, a little bit of running, training for the Spartan race. And then like classic, I read Born to Run, and that was it. I like literally looked at Spartan races and I was like, not for me. And I'm going to go run ultras now. Right. And so then I just started training to run my first ultra. So it kind of it was kind of a natural progression from used to backpack, really like the wilderness, like the woods. How can I experience that and do kind of more done in a day kind of situations or done in a short weekend kind of thing. Right. And then,
that's an interesting perspective to come from seeing ultras as a less time intensive, not so much training, but the actual act of the race itself. You're coming from disappearing for 5 days or 14 days. You're saying, hey, the 100-mile, 50K, ultra world was a little bit less of a, what would you say, time constraint, time consuming thing.
Yeah, 100%. And it was like, ultimately it's like vocation, life, like all these things start to like stack up against, your ability to do some of these things, and so that's kind of, and I liked it. I kind of got into, to be honest, like I traded like a pretty hard nicotine addiction for a fitness addiction, I traded endorphins, and I love training. Like I'm at the point now where I just really, really, really enjoy that process. I enjoy the, an hour a day on the week, plus like some strength stuff. And then, trying to go long on the weekends when I can and when time permits. And so it's kind of, for me, it was kind of a natural progression, actually like maybe degression, from a time standpoint. But it just came down to like, as you get older, like you have to start thinking about the future, but you still like to play in the mountains. And so that's what I was trying to balance.
So you read Born to Run, you start to get into it. What's the first race that you signed up for? Do you remember?
Yeah, I ran Way Too Cool. So we had moved.
That was your first race?
Yeah, first race. So
That's
I lived
awesome.
I was living in the Sierra foothills at the time that I read Born to Run, and then we ended up moving to Sonoma County. And then I fell into that's kind of where I fell into an ultra running scene for the first time. I'm not sure how I think Way Too Cool was just like on the radar because it's one of those like quintessential first time ultras in California. If you live in Northern California and you want to run your first ultra, like Way Too Cool 50K is kind of the race to do. I had been going down. This is right when the San Francisco Running Company was incepted and started, and so I was going down there and like hanging out with all those guys, and they definitely did a good job of incepting the ultra, continuing to feed the stoke and the fire of the ultra bug. And you walk into a shop where you have like legit known fast people like helping you with your gear and your shoes, and then their group runs are legendary and were legendary and still are. And I was never fast enough to hang with the front, but it was like the community there is like super welcoming in the Bay Area. Yeah, so I ran Way Too Cool, and I actually ran a couple miles with this guy, who was from Sonoma County, and he ended up introducing me to a bunch of cats that ended up becoming like my training crew for like the next 5 years while I lived and ran ultras. So it was kind of that classic like run your first 50K, meet some people, and then I mean, these are the guys that taught me that it's all about vert and time on feet and just like all of the classic ultra stuff, and
stuff that just continue. Like it's all of a sudden, as a non-elite runner or not very fast runner, you start to learn stuff like you're talking about, and it opens this world up to you. Like, oh, this world is for me. I'm wearing a hat that says outdoors is for everyone. What I really think is, ultras are for everyone. Like all of a sudden you open the door and realize, oh, this really is for almost everyone, not just 100% fast runners. And so you get like when that light switch starts to come on, it's like, oh, even me who, in a 100-mile effort, I'm going to be worried about the cutoff at Wasatch of 36 hours. I mean, but it's for me. I love that.
Yeah. And like, even prior to running my first ultra, like when I was living in Placerville, like I spectated at Western States the year Timmy Olsen broke the course record, like and awesome. Was the first guy to run under 15 hours. Like I was there. Like I was like showing up to watch that race happen for like 2 or 3 years while I lived up there before I ever ran ultras, because I was still trying to build myself up to like, into that shape. I started running like 5Ks again, so I wasn't racing 5Ks, but that's why I'd go run, and I was trying to like build up my fitness. And like when you get, man, Josh, that's like drinking from the freaking fire hose, man. Like when you want to run ultras and you go to watch Western States and you're just like, oh, okay, sweet. This is it. Like, this is what's going on. So, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, like if your first ultra is Way Too Cool, you're, within proximity to the Western States finish line, the high school. Like if you're in Placerville, you drive past the high school probably like on any given day. You're in the company and the presence of, of greatness. It's hard to not get sucked in, especially when you have those aha moments of this sport is for me too. So what was your first 100-mile attempt? Where was that at?
So like fast forward like 8 years and 7-8 years. And it was Grindstone 2020, not this year, but last year. So 2022. Oh, and it would have been, so it was the last year before the UTMB acquisition. So it was like the old school feel. And I had wanted to run 100 for like the last 4 or 5 years, and like something would get in the way. Like the first year I was working, I was walking across a tarp, and there was a cinder block underneath the tarp, and I just I kicked the crap out of the cinder block about as hard as you possibly could, and had the most ridiculous bruise on my big toe, and I thought it was broken. And it was like 3 weeks before I was going to sign up for Rio de Largo. And this is back when I think usually you can still kind of walk up at Rio, but this is back when like it didn't sell out, So it was one of those things where I was like, okay, cool. Like I'll just be a last minute, I'll just sign up last minute. And I was like, okay, cool. I guess I'm not running that 100-miler. The next year I had my first of 3 inguinal hernias that happened almost in succession year after year with a year break. So I had 3 hernias in 5 years. had to have them repaired. They just got in the way of running hundreds, because I could, you take a little
fair.
Yeah, you take a little bit of a break. You got to take like 3 months off, then you got to build back up. And, the doctor's like, you can still run ultras after 6 months, but you can't race and you should take it easy. And so, like long story long, we'll wrap it back around to Grindstone. I was training hard. I was going to run I Am Tough. And then I made the wife and I made the decision after having our first kid kind of on a whim. We moved from California back to the East Coast. And so I've been hunting, Western States qualifier, and I wanted to start qualifying for Hard Rock. And I was looking on the calendar and I'm just like, what can get me both? Because that I Am Tough was going to be both of those things,
Right.
And then what's on the East Coast. And I just happened to, I'd heard of Grindstone, the race itself. I didn't really know a lot about it, but that came on the radar and I was like, okay, cool. This is going to be it. So, in the middle of my training block, I drove, a U-Haul with a trailer and our Prius on the back of the trailer across the country. And my wife and child drove, he was 3 months old. So they took a red eye and, my dad and stepmom picked them up and so I'm like driving across the country. Like I remember we left California and, I was like, I've got X amount of hours to get to Flagstaff. When I get to Flag, I get a hotel and then I can go run Flag in the morning, before I hit the road again, So I was like trying to plan like stops as I took 6 days to drive across the country of like, where am I going to put the miles in, So,
So how did Grindstone go?
It went, it was, I thought I was in, I put in a pretty good block and I thought I was in like 27, 28 hour fitness, just based on, and I don't know why I thought this, but I was like, based on, how I feel and what I've done previously in the past at like 50 miles and 100 Ks, I feel like I could do this. It was good. Everything was going really well until it wasn't, honestly. Yeah. And around the 50-mile mark, like the week before the race, I was playing with my cousin. We were playing hide and seek at my brother's house in Asheville. And I remember trying to slide underneath the dining room table to hide from this girl while she was counting to 10. And I felt this pop in the top of my foot. And I was like, oh, that's not good. But I didn't think too much about it. And it kind of went away. It was painful for like 6 hours. And that was like a week before the race. And then at like mile 53 or 54 at the turnaround, the top of my foot starts hurting. And I'm like, okay, this is okay, cool, awesome. I'd loosen my shoes. And I was wearing a pair of shoes that didn't have a lot of padding on the tongue at the top. It was like one of those, is a pair of Ultra Mont Blancs. And, it's like, okay, well, I'll see my dad. My dad was crewing me. I'll see my dad at mile 60 something. So I got a couple miles. And then there's a huge descent between then and there. And so going down this descent, it was like super painful to go downhill. And I'm like, oh, this is going to get interesting. And we get down to the aid station. I take my shoe off and there's like this just nice lump on the top of my foot where one of my tendons was just like not happy with me. And I just started doing triage. So I started taping it up and, but I was like, oh, I'll pull out my second pair of shoes. And of course, like it's the same type of shoe. It's just a newer pair of the shoe. So that's not going to solve the like no cushion on the top of the shoe problem. And I just kind of set off, man. I had to reevaluate goals. And it was slow going at first. And I kind of got used to it, to the pain. And I think it kind of settled itself down. And I was able to just kind of some running, some marching and kind of make it to the finish. It took like...
So you got the finish.
Yeah, almost 34 hours. Yeah, it was like 2 hours it was like 2.5 hours from the cutoff. So,
well, I mean, yeah. And so this transitions nicely. I know you've got other 100-mile experience and, ups and downs in those, but even that, like, talk to me about how you pushed through that. Like, what did you have inside your head that, once you saw that, because you would have had the excuse, you could have taken a photo of it, posted on Instagram and say, I DNF'd and check this out. You had the excuse, whatever,
Yeah.
How did you keep going?
Well, I mean, at that point, and like, honestly, for the last like 2 years, my like vocational life has been like, I don't want to say tumultuous, but, I was like, I just moved my family across the country. Right. I was putting in like, at that time we were staying at my dad's while we were trying to figure out where we were going to live. And like waiting to kind of get a place, in Asheville, and like I was driving like an hour and a half, getting up early in the morning and driving like an hour and a half to the closest place where I could smash vert for a couple back-to-back long runs over weekends. Like I was putting in a lot of work. And ultimately, you know, I didn't want to stop. And like, I don't know if it's because I'm like stubborn or, you know, and I've been a serial entrepreneur my whole life. So there's this whole like, there's barriers and there's glass ceilings in everything. And it's all about like, how do you just kind of keep moving and grinding through it? To be honest, like stopping, it would have had to have been really, really painful for me to stop. Like there wasn't in that moment, it was like, I can still finish it. I've got enough time where I could walk. I could literally walk. I could probably walk this thing in, you know, like I could suffer through this. It's not, I mean, it's painful, but it's not that painful. I can still run on it. You know, I kind of, as I triaged like the situation, it was like, this isn't as bad as it could be. And it can always get better. I think that's something that I tell myself a lot in these like hard situations, you know, and it did it still hurt, but it didn't hurt as bad. And there wasn't, it really hurt going downhill. And there was only like one more huge descent. There was a lot of climbing ahead of us, but there was just one more really, really big, disgusting descent that I had to deal with. And like, yeah, I just kind of, I don't know, like, I'll be honest with you, Josh, like stopping wasn't a part of it. And then I had ran into a group. There's three of us. One of them stopped. He had a similar issue where like his feet were like, my feet did not look nearly as bad as his feet did. And he had to pull the plug. He had to pull the plug at that same aid station where I started triaging my injury. And then there was another one of his friends, and we basically finished. I mean, we ran the last 50 miles of the route together. You know,
nice.
We all but held hands at the finish. You know, like we crossed the mat together. We didn't hold hands, but we told each other like, hey, let's cross the mat together.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it just kind of was one of those, like, I had someone to help push me. He was willing to like, we were kind of in the same place as far as like the pace we wanted to do it, you know? And so we, you know, I guess misery loves company. And so we just kind of work through it together. So
what was your finish? And you kind of said this, but maybe I'm reflecting back to what I'm hearing, and you let me know if I've got it. Your finish of that, your determination to finish was connected to everything that you had been through in your life over the last couple of years prior to. Is that an accurate representation? Like when you thought about, I'm going to keep going because I've done this, or I put my family through this, or not put my family through it, but we've been through a lot together. And in some ways this finish is connected to that. Do you agree with that at all? Am I hearing that correctly?
Well, no, I mean, 100%. And that's something that, you know, when it gets really dark, and it always does. Yeah. I finished 300s at this point, and like, nice. I've never managed to have like a perfect, like when I say perfect, like, you know, where there's only like a 2-hour low, you know, like where it gets hard and low and you're just like hating life for like an hour, maybe two. Like there's always been these like just ridiculous extended time periods of sucking, you know, for lack of a better word. And like, it's not like I like it, but I know that it's coming, and I know that I wouldn't run 100-miler if I didn't want to go there. Like if I don't have to go there, that's great. You know what I mean? But like, I'm doing it because deep down inside, like that ability to suffer in a controlled environment is something that like I kind of yearn for at this point in my life. And maybe that changes. And like, it's changed for me this year because I'm not going to run 100-miler this year because it takes a lot out of me and my family to do it. And I've just got other things that I need to prioritize for like 2024. I'm still running some ultras, you know, but you know, to go back to your question, like, yeah, man, like I think about my mom, you know, I think about the sacrifice my family puts, you know, on the table for me to do it. I think about my dad, who's been out there crewing me for 100-miler. And Grindstone is crazy because like you start at 6 p.m. So when I finished on Friday. You start at 6 p.m. on Friday. I finished at almost 4 o'clock in the morning on Sunday. And I didn't sleep. And I know he slept
Yeah.
for like an hour. And this guy's like at every crew spot there waiting,
Nice.
you know, waiting with bells on for me. So there's like,
Yep.
I mean, it helps to motivate you. But at the end of the day, I was like, this is a goal that I've set for myself. And unless like, you know, I don't want to say like, I don't want it to be trite, but like, if there's bones sticking out, then we can stop. You know what I mean? If if I feel like I'm gonna do irreparable damage to myself, we can stop. It didn't necessarily feel that way, and I was kind of in a little bit of a push through kind of mentality with it. But I was just lucky that it mellowed itself out. You know, like if it would have gotten any worse than what I felt on that downhill, if that would have came back, it may have been pretty difficult not to pull the plug, say at like mile 80 when I saw my dad again. You know, so.
Yeah. Last question, just because I'm curious on multiple levels, and I just frankly love learning about your upbringing in Germany and Guantanamo. In your ultra career, in your ultra efforts, is there anything that we all bring our past with us to every starting line, good or bad, whatever it is. Is there anything from that upbringing that you learned or that you particularly appreciate that applies to your ultra running? That's kind of a broad question, but I'm just curious.
Yeah. I mean, so I've had to be pretty flexible. When I was younger, I had to be like rather flexible with things. Like I didn't grow up in the same town. I lived in, by the time I was 18, I had lived in 5 countries, you know, including the United States full time. I had visited I think of the total right now is like I visited something like 36 or 37 countries, you know, because Europe's a pretty small place. You can get to a lot of cool places in Europe. So like, you know, I understand that life is about change, you know, and like when I'm in an ultra, like I know that this moment that sucks right now, in a minute, it may not suck again, you know, or it could be hours of sucking and then all of a sudden it gets better. And like, for me, it's about like, how do you kind of get to that next phase of life, whatever it happens to be. And like my life has gone through multiple, even post like graduating from high school, like I've been through multiple phases of like who, you know, whatever Troy Meadows is and what Troy Meadows does, to get to this moment in time here where like I'm a 43-year-old man with a wife and a child, you know, like, so, you know, there's that, you know, I think one thing that I learned from this year's Grindstone where we ran a tropical storm, I had a crazy low point and it was it was a marathon. It took me 12 hours to like basically, you know, death march a marathon from mile 40 to mile 70.
I can't imagine. Yeah.
And when we get into this aid station, like my wife's there with my kid and I'm like, how long you been here? You know, because I felt really bad because if she showed up when I told her to show up, she'd been there for like 4 hours in the pouring rain. And she's like, I got here 30 minutes ago. And I'm like, oh man, you know me well, don't you? And she started laughing. And like I sat down with my son on my knee and started feeding him peanut butter and jelly sandwich, you know, that they brought over from the aid station. He's like, give me some more, like doing the more thing. And we're like vibing for like 15, 20 minutes. And like,
oh, that's good.
I'm just like, you know what? Like, this is great. This is amazing, you know? And you know, I got up and, you know, I said my goodbyes. And when I left that aid station, I was like, I kind of told myself, I was like out loud yelling at myself, like, are you ready? Like, let's go. Like, are you ready? And then I proceeded to run like about as fast of the last 50K as I ran the first 50K. And it's like,
dang, nice.
And that's what I'm trying to find again. You know, like I'm trying to figure out like, how do I stay in that moment? Because, you know, I should have ran that 12-hour marathon should have been a 7-hour effort.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so it's like,
I love that 42, 43-year-old, you know, as I've entered my 40s, I'm now 41. You're kind of at this intersection of like, you know, society tells me that I should be slowing down and doing less. Not telling me that I should be, but you know, the prevailing narrative is your body is becoming less capable. And I'm only hearing from you that yours is becoming more capable. I'm
in better shape today at 43 than I was when I was 23. Like bar none, like no questions asked because of, and like goes back to like, I love training. I love trying to get fit. I'm trying to do this when I'm 60. So there's this, you got to put the work in, you know, and it's something that I'm willing to like, I have a life, you know, don't get it twisted, but like, I don't care about going, some of my friends were like, oh, we're going to get tickets to the Sphere and go watch Fish at the Sphere. And I was like, I want nothing to do with that. And they're just like, what, what's up? And I'm like, I want to go to the woods with my son. Like, that's my new, like, raging, for me, raging all night now is running an ultra, like that's, and I'm okay. I'm cool with that. Like, that's what I want to do now, and it's like, and that's just kind of, it's about reframing where you are at the different seasons of your life. And, I partied in my 20s hard enough for you and I both, man, into our 50s. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, I don't really need that anymore. I can enjoy life. I can enjoy the simpler part of life, but like, I also really enjoy putting myself out there and doing hard things. And so, yeah.
Man, well, Troy, that's a perfect note to end on, that, the road goes on forever and the party never ends. I'm from Texas. Sir. That's our mantra. Let's get a shout out to what you do with the Midpacker Pod and some clothing that you've been putting out. How about we wrap with you just telling us a little bit about what you do in the ultra running world?
Yeah. Okay. So, like, I just started a coaching service. So I just got my coaching cert. So, if anyone wants help on their ultra journey and wants the perspective from a solid middle of the packer, I have a 60%. I land in the 60% on ultra sign up. You're not going to get any advice from a pro here. You're going to get advice from someone who's just been grinding away for the last decade.
Nice.
I do the pod, the Midpacker Pod. You can find it wherever you get your podcasts. If you're interested in coaching services, my handle on Instagram is Troy on the Run. And
I'll put that in the show notes for sure.
Yeah, you can just DM me there. Run Trail Life, that's kind of a brand I've been working on for about a year, trying to put some more work into it this year. But we do some just fun ultra running specific apparel. It's all sustainable. It's like either recycled cotton and recycled polyester blanks, or 100% cotton, organic cotton blanks. And it's just fun, tongue in cheek stuff. It's meant to be the shirt you go to when you finish your long run and you're about to go meet people for coffee, like something like soft and comfy that you can put on that kind of allows you to represent your love of the trails, off the trails.
Nice. Yeah.
And
then
we donate,
promo that too.
Yeah. And we donate to Runners for Public Lands. So like if you buy, every time you buy a piece, any piece, $1 goes to Runners for Public Lands. And then, I think I got all the things.
Nice. Well, we'll make sure and drop all that in the show notes and publicize it when we drop these clips. And Troy, I'm really grateful. Learned some cool stuff today. I love hearing about your international upbringing. I love how you tie it to your ultra running. And thanks for sharing your story with me today.
Josh, man, appreciate you for having me on, brother. Thank you.
Yep. Let's do it again.
Yep. Ciao.